welcome to This Week in Indies. Monsters represent the darkest aspects of the human psyche, often mirroring our own worst impulses and thoughts. The most interesting monsters of fiction are complex beings, often tragic and comic figures that elicit powerful and conflicting emotions in readers. How do we write these fascinating characters? Where do we begin molding their grotesque visages? What are the most important aspects of monster building? And how do we deliver them to the readers? In our Twin Notes segment, we let you know about the latest anthology in production from Mocha Memoirs Press. In the middle of our broadcast, we get another great classic episode of CL Canon's Indie Connection. CL brings us books that you may like if you're a fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And we round out the episode with our epilogue, where the panelists try and determine my literary identity, 20 questions. So fire up those goblin pits and put in a call to Dr. Moreau, because it's time for another fantastic episode of This Week in Indies with your host, SM Hillman. Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Indies. I'm your host, SM Hillman. Some people call me a monster, but that's only partially true. With me is a fantastic panel of folks who are new to us, and they are represented by the Creative Edge Publicity Company, or group, whatever. We're really happy to have everybody here. Let's go ahead and, if you can, introduce yourselves to our audience. Tricia, we'll start with you, if you would.
Sure. Good morning, Sean. Thank you so much. My name is Tricia Copeland. I'm mostly a YA fantasy author. My current series is the Realm Chronicle series, the most recent of which books is coming out next week, To Be a Fey Rogue.
Fantastic. Oh, hold on. I always forget to do this. So there's Tricia. Thank you, Tricia. Go ahead, Don, if you would.
Yeah, I'm Don Sawyer. I'm currently living in St. Catharines, Ontario. I have written in a whole bunch of genres. I have about 12 books out, including 2 Canadian bestsellers that I'm proud of. My latest book is The Burning Gem, which is part of a series, the Soul Catcher series. And I'm very happy to be on your show, Sean. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Quast again. I have a couple of books out, but today I'm focusing on A Stony Gaze. It's my recent children's book that I just released that has, I guess, kind of mythology twist on Medusa.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Allison.
I'm Allison McBain, and thanks for having me on. This is great to be on with so many fabulous authors here. I write a bit of everything, so I have written in all genres. I am not just a writer, but also an editor and ghostwriter. So I've written a number of books for various clients too in all genres. But today I'm going to be talking about my latest book, which is The New Empire, which is an alternate history. And in history, there were definitely some monsters.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here with us. Where you find monsters in the latest anthology from Mocha Memoirs Press, in this week's Twin Notes, it's a new segment we're kind of doing, we offer a quick look at A Crack in the Code, an anthology of busted bots and androids amok. A Crack in the Code, Cybertronic Stories of Rebellion, offers readers an intimate glimpse into the mechanical hearts that may have had enough of you, meatbags, and want to bust out of their programming. So go ahead and show a little bit of that.
We are Mocha Memoirs Press, a small, independent publisher based in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Founded in 2010, our goal has always been to amplify marginalized voices in speculative fiction. Following in the footsteps of our 11 other best-selling anthologies, A Crack in the Code, Cybertronic Stories of Rebellion is a collection of thought-provoking tales of androids, robots, and cyborgs gone rogue. These bold, fearless stories explore identity, what it means to be human, and how our relationships define who we are. We are passionate and excited about this powerful anthology because it offers a wide variety of diverse voices, boasting the perspectives of both new and veteran authors authors, as well as representing stories from female, male, non-binary, 2S LGBTQIA, and BIPOC writers. Your contribution to this project will empower us to cover the costs of publishing the anthology and pay our authors Science Fiction Writers Association professional rates. We hope you're as excited about this project as we are, and we look forward to funding it with you.
Awesome. Excellent. If you folks check that out, I'm sure Book of Memorize would appreciate that. So let's go ahead and get to our first question. Tricia, we'll start with you. It's an easy one. What is your favorite literary monster?
My favorite literary monster. Oh, that's. Should I prepare for history? My favorite literary monster. Wow. It might be probably. Does Frankenstein count? I think Frankenstein counts. Yeah, I tend to like things that err on the human side of things, so they're not too in the horror genre, because I get spooked out by ghosts haunting me. I don't like to think about that. And I also don't like to think about monsters being like purely evil just for evil's sake and having nothing redeemable about them. So monsters like Frankenstein and Dracula and other monsters that maybe are more gray appeal to me more, I would say.
So who's more monstrous, do you think, the creature or Dr. Frankenstein?
Probably Dr. Frankenstein, because it hurts me to think that he would create a being that kind of is so damaged and has such a hard life, I think.
Gotcha. Awesome. Don?
Well, my first thought was Sauron, of course, in Lord of the Rings, but more in keeping with my sort of general theme today is that I think I might go with the big nurse in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And she's not your conventional monster, but her disregard, her need to control and devastate these men under her care truly makes her monstrous. Like, for example, Mark Twain once said that humans are the only animals that need to blush and the only ones that need to. I think you can say the same about monsters. You know, the true monsters are really human, unfortunately.
Yeah, and she certainly represents not just a monstrous individual, but a monstrous system, I would think, for healthcare. Yeah.
Well, healthcare sort of, but in this case, mental healthcare going off the rails.
Right. Allison? I'm sorry, Stephanie?
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, for me, I think a lot of people have kind of said this, that like monsters, it's funny because I was talking to my friend about this topic the other day. And like there's this series called You, but it's actually based off of a book. And to me, he's a monster because he's a human, but he's a murderer and a stalker. But at the same time, it's presented in a way where the audience can relate to him in some aspects, which I think is kind of scary. Like it's more mental, but like, yeah, I think the scariest thing sometimes can be strangers or individuals that, I guess make excuses for scary behavior, actions until it escalates to the point where I guess their true monster comes out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we're reminded about we pull monsters often from cases of real people, right? We don't necessarily pull it from. So I mean, there's folklore, but there's also the real actions of human beings, right? Absolutely.
Exactly.
Allison?
I'm going to sort of highlight a genre, I guess, and that is apocalyptic fiction, such as zombie fiction. For the longest time, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I have definitely gotten into it recently, and I'd like to pull up, it's not, literary as in Dracula or Frankenstein, but The Walking Dead as a graphic novel. And I love it. And the reason I love it is because the true villains are not the dead, the zombies. The true villains, as everyone, this is sort of the theme, I guess, of this question. The true villains are the people who do terrible things to other people. So I like that complexity of who are the real villains, and that is a question that I think echoes and is resonant with a lot of readers.
Absolutely. And the way they sometimes weaponize the dead against one another, I think is
Exactly.
a very good example of that monstrousness.
Definitely.
Awesome. Excellent. What do we feel like, we've touched on this a little bit already, what do we feel is the role of the monster in, I'd say literature, but writing, in our writing in general? Alison, we'll start with you. What is the role of the monster?
Well, the most obvious one is the antagonist. It's, someone to root against so that you can root for the hero. But I like complex villains and complex heroes, like that don't always make the right choice and don't always make the wrong choice. So I like to blur those lines. Like, who are you really rooting for? But yeah, the basic role of the villain is to be someone to root against, to someone you want to see defeated by the end of the book, right?
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Stephanie?
I think, like Allison pointed out, I'm very similar in the way that the villain is complex, and sometimes, in the story you have what you think is an obvious villain, but really that you get more details or hear more backstories, and the tables turn. So the person that you were impressed was the hero and is actually the villain. So I kind of like stories like that where it leaves you guessing on who the actual villain is.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you. Don?
Well, I was thinking, I think that the villain serves the function of providing, in a narrative like many that I write, to resist their oppressive forces. I'll give you sort of an interesting little example. This is a book I wrote for kids. I don't know if you can see Miss Flint there, called The Meanest Teacher in the World. Well, I mean, you can have lots of different kinds of monsters and monsters that appeal to different age groups. In this case, she is a teacher that wears a silver whistle around her neck, and every time they get out of order, she blows the whistle. On pizza day, she makes them eat carrots. She steals their candy on Halloween because it might rot their teeth. So and of course the theme of the story is that the kids find ways to strike back. So the villain, and who is actually more complicated than I'm letting her on today, is the foil. It's the point of the focus of resistance, if you will.
I know that I would be very upset if my teacher had taken my candy away.
He hid in bushes and jumped out and grabbed it back.
Oh my goodness. Awesome. Trisha?
Yeah, I like a lot of the things that the other authors have shared as well, but I think as an antagonist, they also are the impediment to what the protagonist wants to achieve in the story a lot of times. So in doing that, I think they illuminate the qualities of the protagonist. So they set these challenges and stumbling blocks, if you may, so that you can show your readers what your protagonist is really made of. And, if they might have some flaws as well as strengths, but I think those challenges can illuminate really what you want to show the readers as the best and maybe sometimes the worst qualities of the protagonist.
Right. Oh, yeah. I think, too, one of the things that a lot of monsters have is a fear, right? That's kind of the initial response characters have to the monsters, is that fear response. And that sort of can cut the legs out from under even a brave protagonist, right?
Yeah, you can't. Well, you could have a protagonist that is not scared of anything, but where's the fun in that? Because
what do we? So, what are some other qualities? You can just think of one or two that a monster might have, and I'll just go ahead and throw that out. And also, I'm thinking too a little bit. Well, we'll get to that question in a second. So qualities that you think are essential to the monster.
Should I go? Is that was that me?
Yeah,
Okay.
That's fine.
To me, you really have to pick your setting. I mean, think about your world that you're in, and think about your characters and what may scare them most. Even so, if you're in a highly high tech society, like the trailer we saw before, you might want to create those monsters that are high tech, android, computerized AI versions of people. But if, like, my Fae are set more in the Middle Ages technology, so they don't have electricity or running water or lights or computers or any of those things. So a Zyborg coming, they might not even know what it is. Like, they wouldn't even know to be scared of it, right? It may be a god to them. So, like, in those settings, I go to more traditional monsters like goblins or ogres or things like that, dragons, that would instill that fear, because they know what these creatures can do. So a lot of times I think it's thinking about your world and your characters and what monsters are going to speak to them.
Well, and I think that's very important too, right? Because you want to make a monster in some ways familiar to the reader, right? So that they can reach back to their own memories or their own experiences and relate, hopefully not too traumatically, to the monster that you've created.
Right. And I think depending on the genre that you're writing in, maybe you want to be really, really creative and you want to do something completely different and new and you want to create your own. But if you're writing in a genre that has like a lot of lore and history, and the fans are going to like love it if you do like maybe a little twist on one of the monsters, just like you do a little twist on one of the hero characters, then that can be really fun.
Absolutely. Don, what do you think? What's the essential?
I think the first thing is they have to induce fear. I thought what Tricia said was absolutely right, and so it challenges the protagonist to find what's inside of them, the courage to go forward, regardless of the obstacles, in terms of meeting their objectives and what it is that's propelling them forward. I guess the other thing I'd like to say is that I think monsters have to be monstrous, and that doesn't necessarily mean in appearance, but in their inner selves. I guess that's why I have a little trouble with some of the sort of conventional monsters. I mean, they're just kind of they're parodies, but they're not monsters. That requires a certain to be a monster requires a certain self-awareness, a certain intention, that to be evil, to be cruel, to be hateful. This again, I don't think animals have that. They may kill each other, but it's within the constraints of a social order. Humans are like the only ones who go out and actually mean to each other. And so to me, I guess that monstrosity is more inside than outside, although in my latest book, the Messer, the hideous Messer, is pretty hideous. So I think that physical, to me, in that case, the physical appearance is an expression of the inner monstrosity.
And as you're talking, I was thinking, I'm thinking about that. So, like, for instance, in Jason Voorhees, in the first time we see him versus him in Jason X, right? The first time he's much more, I think you probably understand why he's trying to kill these people. Whereas by the time it's like Jason X, it's like, okay, whatever. He's not that scary and monstrous. He's just a sort of a character, right?
Right. And sort of loses, I think, like you say, loses that motivation, loses that sort of moral, I mean, without any kind of moral conflict, then you truly are a monster. And you have no, I mean, you're a sociopath. And those truly are monsters. And so I think it's funny, I was just reading a book. I really liked the first in the series, and this time the detective just loses his moral compass. And so he's no longer sympathetic. He's just kind of boring.
Right. Gotcha. Awesome. Stephanie?
Yeah, like for me, even with my own book, A Stony Gaze, like, like in the story concept of like Medusa, everybody thinks Medusa's the monster, but really, sometimes the monsters are more like, can be an object or a purpose, or sometimes monsters aren't even fully people, but sometimes people that think they're fighting for what is right or what they believe is heroic, it turns out they're actually the monster in another person's story. And I think developing monsters, really, you can go about it so many different angles, but I really like when the monster is more hidden, or monsters are relatable to people, like they can relate to them, because I think it brings out a lesson too of what is it exactly that creates these monsters, or elements that can turn someone into a monster. That's basically what I kind of see a lot, like, and we see that happening a lot in stories, especially like in movies. If you notice, they're starting to do a lot of the flip side of like the villain's point of view, or why the villain became, I guess, the villain, or how the story has been twisted. So I've noticed that's been a pattern coming out lately within monsters or villains.
So, it's interesting too with Medusa and other characters as well. I imagine that the person, that character doesn't have to necessarily be a villain, but the way that people treat her over the years, and she might eventually say, okay, I'm going to be the monster that you really think I am, right? That she could have, it's like, gets tired of people's crap, and then becomes much more monstrous based on that.
Right. Like for example, in my story, Medusa can't control it, like the people that turn into stone. Matter of fact, the reason people are turning into stone is because they're looking at her like a monster or as an object, so it reflects back onto them. But when they discover that they look at her as an individual, they don't actually turn into stone. Then that's when kind of the lesson comes out that, like, Medusa wasn't the monster all along, it was the people.
Right. Awesome. I think we're discovering that people really are monsters all over. Allison?
I completely agree. I love the hidden monsters. I love to flip the script, and the person you think on page one is, oh, this is the bad guy that I'm rooting against. Maybe they have more of a story behind them, and maybe the real monster is the one that's hidden, the one that you're rooting for at first. So I love to utilize the phrase "good intentions pave the road to hell." They really do sometimes, because it can be a slippery slope. A character might justify one thing and then justify another, and before you know it, they're hurting everyone around them. So I really love the hidden monster. So at the end, you're like, oh my goodness, I was totally rooting for the wrong guy.
Right. And there's a skill to that too, right? Where, you're trying to sort of mask the intentions, everybody's intentions, until the point where that becomes relevant in the story.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So we could talk a little bit about process, and we're going to start at the beginning and then end at the ending. But if everyone could, when you're mindfully creating this character as this monster, where do you begin? Allison, we'll start with you. Where do you begin your monster creation?
Well, again, I like to do the hidden monster. So I like to paint a picture of a very 3D type of character. I'm the type of author who actually does character sketches ahead of time before I actually sit down to write. So I like to know 100% who my characters are, their backgrounds, and not all of this makes it onto the page, right? And I do a full outline of my book, so I know exactly how to flip the script. And so when I'm writing a monster, I want to make sure that I can insert them in sort of like, okay, maybe this is the guy you're rooting for. but at what point am I going to change that? At what point am I going to reveal like the terrible things that they're doing? So yeah, so I go in prepared and hopefully take the reader by surprise.
Awesome. Stephanie, where do you begin your process of monster creation?
So for me, with any character, I approach it like I really like to keep the character within the character and not make the character leave character just to get from A to B. So I start off with my monsters, relating them as close as I can to people. And basically, I use a personality test. Sorry about my little monster in the background.
That's okay, not a problem. Not a problem.
I'll just grab her quick. But yeah, I use a personality test. Like, it's a well thought out personality test that basically people use and have developed. Psychiatrists and doctors have developed. And I use that as my starting point to kind of make, I guess, the monster more human as possible, if that makes sense. And just like Allison, I like the monsters to be hidden. Like I like to present in a way where you think the monster is obvious from the first start of the page, but then it turns out that the monster is not exactly who you thought it was, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's how I develop, is I just start out with this personality test, go through weaknesses, strengths, and just make the monster as relatable as possible.
Awesome. Don, where do you start when you're creating a monster?
Well, actually, I'm thinking about my. If you allow me just a minute, just to read a paragraph of what, in this particular case, I wanted this monster to be fearsome. I wasn't particularly interested in any good qualities for him. He was just supposed to be, evil. So I actually literally got a picture, a photograph, and I said, this is what I'm looking for. And so he comes off like this. The master was small, very small, barely able to lean his scrawny elbows on his huge mahogany desk, even though the matching desk chair was at its maximum height. Enormous ears stood out on the sides of his head like fleshy satellite dishes. Sunken cheeks, always covered in a scruffy beard that looked like mold, set off thick, deep-frowning lips that pulled downward nearly to his whiskered chin. A large, bulbous nose fell from a high forehead with just a fringe of gray hair at the edges. All that aside, it was his eyes Victor never got used to. The old man's eyelids were pouched and red, framing huge sockets sunk deep under great bushy eyebrows. But the eyes, they were the color of amber jewelry, deep yellow-orange, and most peculiar of all were the pupils. They were not round, they were oval, like that of a cat, but where a cat's pupil tapered from top to bottom, the old man's ran from side to side like elliptical black seeds. Yellow, orange, and red streaks ran from the pupils to the very edge of the eye. Only a thin wedge of white framed the flaming pupils on each side. I just wanted this guy to just emanate evil. And so in that case, he doesn't waver from that. In this particular case, although we do get some insight into his orphanage. In this particular case, I just started literally with a picture, which I thought embodied the kind of character that I wanted to create. He's not a complicated character. He's just downright evil.
Gotcha. Trisha?
So those are scariest monsters, the ones that are just evil for evil's sake. I'm more of a pantser than everyone in this group. I think I start with, I always know where I'm starting in the book or the series, where my characters are starting, and I always know where I want them to end up. But what happens in the middle, sometimes I'll have some ideas of challenges that come up, and I will start the beginning with like the main character set and like Allison, like make a list of how this character looks, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and I have those plastered beside my computer so I can look at them and make sure I'm staying true to the character. But like what happens in the middle and what was their backstory, I didn't have that planned out from the beginning. I'm writing the last book of the Realm Chronicles series, which kind of will be the finale. So now I have the backstory of the monster, quote unquote, antagonist fleshed out and all of her complicated, that kind of explains all her complicated actions. And at one point she dies and she becomes an archangel, but an evil archangel. So she doesn't even have a human form anymore, which is kind of interesting, but she has all this more power. So yeah, I'm kind of like, I love the creative process. So in the middle, I'm making things up, but it really all has to tie back to the goals of the protagonist and the main theme I want to share in the story.
Excellent, thank you. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of our comments. Say hello to the folks out there. AF Stewart, hello, hi. Vanessa, how you doing? Jessica, morning to you, kiddo.
She's misjudging my age.
And I think that was to the question, who's the real monster, Frankenstein or the creature, Victor? Yeah, I think we all agree Victor is the real monster. Yep, ultimately. Yep, Vanessa, yep, Nurse Ratched, that is a good one. Oh, yeah, the spin-off TV series was good.
I didn't even know there was a TV series. Jessica give us an ooh. Human monsters are the scariest. Yep, I agree with that, Vanessa. I think that's been a theme of what we've been talking about for sure. Books by Tiffany. Hello. Hey, Tiffany. How you doing? Yep, you're late. No problem. I agreed. I would be salty. And they do strike back. I want you to know.
That's excellent. Good for those kids. Yep, the scariest monsters are the ones that don't seem like monsters initially, right? Yes, absolutely. I think that's something we'll probably touch on here in a few minutes, Jessica. But yeah, sometimes the monster is a reflection of our societal concept of, in a fear of society, right? Yes, it was. Yes, it was her fault. It was their fault. Yep, you're exactly right. All right, awesome. So while we contemplate our next question, it's sort of also part of the process. And Tricia, you touched on it a little bit already. How do you know when a monster is finished, or at least finished for the work in progress at the moment? But we are going to take a quick break and enjoy the Indie Connection, our best of Indie Connection. CL Cannon will be back with us with new Indie Connections later next year, I think, or earlier next year. But for the moment, we're doing a lot of CL Cannon's best of. And so today, Indie Connection is about Frankenstein. Here we go.
CL Cannon here from Fiction Atlas Press, bring you another Indie Connection. And in honor of Halloween, we are going to be doing books that you might enjoy if you're a fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The first book I have for you is called Shade by Marie de Stefano. A dangerous holiday, a deadly curse brought to life. When Mary Wollstonecraft Goodwin accepted an invitation to Lord Byron's house party deep in the Swiss Alps, she hoped it would serve as a welcome distraction from her broken heart. Instead, she finds herself surrounded by enigmatic guests with their own dangerous secrets to hide. From the moment of her arrival, the party is more than it seems, as Mary and the others are strictly forbidden from leaving the villa after dark. But tales of feral beasts aren't the only rumors whispering through the halls. Dr. John Polidori, a handsome and mysterious party guest, fervently pursues local legends that the dead can rise, ruled by their own barbaric king. When the group plays a game of storytelling to pass the time, they weave together tales of nightmarish ghouls and horrible villains inspired by the myths. And Mary soon realizes their harmless stories have the power to conjure. Twisted creatures will come to call, the dead will stalk the villa, and the royal master will stop at nothing to claim Mary as his own. The second book I have for you is called Teen Frankenstein by Chandler Baker. It was a dark and stormy night when Tor Frankenstein accidentally hits someone with her car and kills him, but all is not lost. Tor, being the scientific genius she is, brings him back to life. Thus begins a twisty-turny take on a familiar tale set in the town of Hollow Pines, Texas, where high school is truly horrifying. The third book I have for you is called Monster Born by Chris Austin Radcliffe. What happens when a man starts life as a corpse? 200 years ago, Frank Victorson awoke as a semi-dead, monstrous abomination reanimated by his hubris-ridden father, Victor Frankenstein. But Frank refused to become the infernal hate his father spewed at the world. He walked away from his origins and into a small Minnesota town overflowing with magic. Now Dr. Frankenstein's other sins want revenge. The Nordic elves of Frank's new home call him family. The werewolves call him friend. And when the town's vampires disappear and innocents die, Frank realizes the demon responsible might be the one force on Earth faster and stronger than him, and the one foe capable of pulling to the surface his long-suppressed rage. Now Frank must stop a rampaging evil bent on murdering the people he loves the most. But can he save his town without losing himself to the monster he once tamed? And the last book I have for you is called The Prometheus Collector by Joshua Dyer. No one wants to be fooled, but that's what Frankenstein did to you all. Victor's words were the mere ravings of a coward and madman. The truth is a fickle mistress. I was the one that raided the graveyards and robbed the dead of their terrestrial remains. It was I who pursued your creation across continents when you hadn't the spine to see to it yourself. It was I who held my begotten son in my hands that day. Frankenstein took the glory, took the fame, and hoarded the money from our misfortunes. The time for my retribution has come.
Okay, that's all for me this week. I'll see you next week on The Indie Connection. Bye.
Thank you so much, CL, for doing these indie connections. We're really happy to be showing folks, many for the first time, seeing these older best ofs collection. So, as I mentioned before, when do you know, how do you know when the monster is finished, if they're ever finished, right? But how do you know when they're ready for prime time in the story that you're working on? Tricia?
Because I write, I kind of create as I write. My monster is finished probably when I write the last book in the series, or at least the last word, or finish that book and send it to the editor. The story and the personalities and the drives really get shaped as I'm writing. So I can't, that's, for me, that's what it is. And even as I'm working on my monster now, even sessions like this will make me think, oh, that's a good idea, or ooh, that's a good idea. So, and that's just my process. I love the creative part of it.
Gotcha. Awesome. Don?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I was thinking too that you create a monster that's satisfactory for the initial stages, and then back to what Allison had said, if you have kind of a character sketch, then there's a consistency that you can build on. What motivates him, what his background is, how he would respond in a given situation, and depending on the kind of the arc you want to create of the monster, you develop those characteristics in a variety of situations. So if he's a ruthless son of a bitch, then you just provide different examples of that over the course of the book to serve the function of the antagonist. So I think he evolves over the process of the book, but there's a consistency with the initial conception.
Excellent. Stephanie?
Yeah, like for me with the writing process of creating a monster, just like I was saying before, I always start off with, first of all, you have to have an idea of the character. And for me, I get inspired by music, especially instrumental, even if it's just painting a scene, one scene, or how I guess the monster's feeling at a certain point. I use that to build off and to research the personality that this monster is in, like the weaknesses, the strengths, the motivation, and really making them human. It's kind of like when you're developing a story or the monster, it's like a puzzle. Like you're putting together a puzzle. And really, I think the monster ends uh, also when the puzzle is fully put together, because like you can't fully know the monster's finish until you have also finished the environment. Because if you think about it, it doesn't matter what your personality is and whatnot too, because environment can also affect what people do, right? You have your personality, and that's part of the puzzle piece, but then you're putting down other layers and details, kind of like a blank canvas, and you're detailing it with these things that create the monster, create the story, and environment and the situation the monster's put in also affects that. So it's really putting down the pieces, and once those pieces are laid down and everything's correct, you can see if there's a piece missing. And when the pieces are all put down and all together, really, your monster's ready. Like you can measure even the process when you're having a series. Instead of going back to the start where the monster was, you can measure the development and then continue to develop throughout the series, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Absolutely. Allison?
For me, I have sort of a two-part process. So one, I'll write, or three-part process, I guess. One, I'll write the first draft of the whole book. And there are two types of writers generally. There are overwriters and underwriters. I am one of the underwriters. So I actually have to go back in after I've written my first draft and flesh it out and add more. So usually my first drafts are about half the size of the finished draft, maybe a little bit more. So then I start to fill in a lot more of the details for all the characters, not just the monster. So what is like particularly twisted? How can I do a little side story? How can I do, like a side quest kind of thing for my characters? And that's when I really actually start to fill in more of like, how can the monster be really take the reader by surprise? How can they do something that is so terrible that there's no coming back, there's no redemption for them? So that's when I start to fill in some of those details. So at the end of my draft, when I'm like, okay, I detest the monster myself, I do not like this character that I created, I don't like them, hopefully the reader won't like them too. And then my final step is I run it by, I have a fabulous writers group called the Fairfield Scribes. I run it by my writers group. And if they say, okay, you did it, you got it, send it off, like then I'm like, okay, great, thumbs up. A lot of times, not just sometimes, a lot of times they'll be like, okay, you didn't quite hit the mark. I don't 100% hate this character. You need to do more. Or, like, oh, this character is too much. I don't believe this character is that evil. You need to tone it back a bit. So I always, at the end of my process, is putting it through other people's eyes, putting it through beta readers, putting it through my writers group to make sure that I really hit the mark on what I was trying to do.
Here we go. Thank you. That's fantastic. I'll throw this out to everybody, and anyone can answer if they wish. What about the monster as a protagonist? How do we feel about that? Do we feel that's something that you, as a writer or as a reader, that you enjoy doing or reading? How do we feel about the monster as a protagonist?
Well, if you mean a protagonist as an initiator, of the activity, then I think that can be delightful, because that the motivation we were talking earlier about. Well, what is a character trying to do? What is their goal? What gets in the way? What are their responses? Well, the same thing can be said about what is the monster about? What are his motives? What are his objectives? What's getting in his way? So if you've got someone who's representing an evil cabal determined to convince the world of Nietzsche's Weltanschauung that only there's a small elite that should govern over the rest of us who are just basically slaves, well, then that activating that evil, being the protagonist, is a delight, because now you know what you're up against, and so the fight begins. So I mean, I think if that's what you're talking about, I mean, it's like, what are we dealing with? Just like we were saying about you've got to know something about the monster's motives. You've got to know something about his objective. What is he trying to achieve? And even monsters have some goal, and the poor things are defeated at every turn. So I think having that can be a very effective way of moving a story along.
Fantastic. Anybody else? Any thoughts of the monster as protagonist?
Yeah, like I like actually the monster as the protagonist. Like, at least in one of my books, I actually use that tactic where in Stony Gaze, the monster, or what you think is the monster, is the protagonist. And it's not till later on you discover that the protagonist is the monster, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was thinking of your character of Medusa when you were talking about, I was asking the question. Absolutely. Allison or Tracy or Trisha? Sorry.
Yeah, completely. I think stories, who the protagonist is or who the antagonist is, really depends on how you write it. Because you could take, look at the popular TV show Dexter, right? Who is the protagonist? Well, a mass murderer. So generally that would be the villain, but it's written from his perspective. It is shown from his perspective. So it really is how you portray it, how you can slant it. So for me, yeah, for most of my stories that I've written, if you flip the script, if you look at it from the antagonist point of view, you could totally write a complete story that goes along and you're rooting for the antagonist instead. So I really think that it really is a matter of perspective. I think for a lot of, there are some monsters that are just complete evil and want to destroy the world, and that sucks, right? But so those are the ones that are harder to write from a sympathetic point of view. But I think almost any villain you can write from a sympathetic point of view and have your reader on the same page with you.
Okay. Trisha?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So many of my fantasy stories are written in first person, so you can only get the view of what's going on for that person right then and what they know, what they're seeing. So they only know what the monster is telling them, or the antagonist is telling them, or what their actions, right? So the fun I have in that is that I can go back and write prequels based on, and show what happened in the past based on what that evil character experienced, and maybe tell some of their backstory and the backstory of the world, and give some more history. So that kind of rounds out, especially if you have a series, what happened in the past, is so you can understand what's happening in the present. I think that can be a lot of fun. I love living in my characters' heads and their lives. So it just extends the story, I think, for the readers too.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think that a lot of people enjoy reading about villains or antagonists in their origin stories, as it were.
If I could just, I think the example of Wicked comes to mind. The bad witch certainly gets her due. I don't like the idea. I feel I'm overstating, like, this idea that you can have a totally evil character. It doesn't mean that they aren't nuanced. It doesn't mean that they're not genuinely motivated by what they think is right. I think so. You can understand the motivations while still understanding the evil consequences of them, or just understanding that they represent a particular perspective that isn't in the interests of the larger community. So I think with maybe some exceptions, for the most part, a monster has to be nuanced if it's going to be effective. There has to be, again, just like any character, there has to be some sense of why is he doing this, and oftentimes that does involve a certain amount, if not empathy, at least understanding and comprehension that there is something here. It's just not acting out of some blind evil, So yeah, it's an interesting question though, about that whole idea of the protagonist as the monster.
Yeah, I don't think Godzilla, for instance, is a monster that is very popular, and has been the protagonist in some ways. But I think that it's always interesting to kind of, like you say, follow those nuances, right? It's like not totally good, not totally bad, kind of a force of nature. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you guys so much. We are now, let's real quick. Vanessa says that she's also an underwriter. I am also an underwriter as well. So I'll go back and add in details in the end. But now it's time for us to enter the epilogue. Yay. And we're going to play 20 questions. So the idea is that you'll ask me 20 questions, and you're just trying to find out what character from fiction I am. And I will give a hint. It's not Frankenstein or his monster. Last week, I somewhat inadvertently chose the main character of the This Week in Indies. So that is not the case this time. Although this particular could be considered monstrous depending on how you look at them. So we're going to ask 20 questions. We'll go in order. We'll start with Allison. We'll go back to Tricia. But you don't have to. It's not a case where everybody gets 5 questions to ask. As a group, you all have 20 questions. So feel free to just blurt out. So Allison, let's start with you.
Are you human?
Yes.
I see. Okay.
What is your motives?
Revenge?
You possess extra normal powers.
No.
Are you a contemporary monster?
No.
Are we going back around or back to me?
Anybody could just jump in at this point. It's fine.
Oh, okay.
You guys have asked 4 questions.
Who's your target?
For revenge.
Someone who wronged me.
Are you part of a series?
No.
Are you a male or female?
Male.
What form does your revenge take?
Killing.
Mm-hmm. That should do it.
Are you successful?
No.
An unsuccessful killer.
Do you kill men or women?
Neither.
He's not successful.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about you're not contemporary. Is your character set in the 19th century?
Yes. Yeah, you guys are at 11 questions, though.
Are you a historical figure?
No.
Fictional. We've got a lot of information, but no answer.
Who are you revenging?
Myself.
Okay, let's come on now. So the 1800s.
And not a historical figure.
Mm-hmm.
And did somebody ask who has wronged you? You said somebody has wronged you. Who in particular?
Well, that would give it away. So.
Oh.
I was going to say, do we only get yes or no questions like the traditional?
Yeah, as a rule, yeah, traditional is yes or no question. That's okay.
Oh, it's just yes or no. Okay.
That's okay. No, you guys have like any binary question is fine, like male or female. I think that was a good question, right? That's fine. Yeah. If this,
Do you act alone?
No.
Is your genre can I ask like an author question? Is your genre mystery?
No.
Oh, okay. So I was thinking something like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Is your genre horror?
No.
Huh.
Is your genre dark romance? I don't know.
So you're at 16 questions. Do you want to ask the dark romance question? Okay. That's okay.
Are you a ghost?
No, that's a good question. No. I mean, maybe later, but no, not in the story.
Oh, no.
So essentially a human man. Mm-hmm.
But not historical. 1800s.
Are you written by an indie author?
Not in the 1800s.
Yeah, everybody was
That's
kind
true.
of in the author back then. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
But so that would be
Okay.
question 18. Do you want to rephrase that question? I'll give you another shot at it.
Me?
But yeah, the last
Or the
question.
1800s? So I guess,
The indie author question.
so is this a very popular book?
I would say it's well read. A lot of people have read it.
All right. Sorry. Is much of the is the character spent a lot of his time on the sea?
Yes.
Aha. I think we know who it is, right? Captain
Yep.
Ahab,
Yep, that is correct. It's Captain Ahab.
Nice.
Captain Ahab.
Was that 19 questions?
That was 19 questions. Well done.
Nice. Good job.
Fist bump.
Those were good questions, though. Yeah, that was very good. Awesome. I'm glad you had a good time with that. All right. So let's go ahead, and Allison, we'll start with you. Just tell everyone who you are again and where they can find your stuff on the web.
So I write a bit in every genre, and I am currently doing actually a project that I'd like to do a shout out for. It's called Author versus AI, where basically I'm writing a book a week, except with no AI at all. And I'm now in week, I want to say 21. I lose track of these things. But you can find me at either my main author website, AllisonMcBain.com, or at my project website, authorversusai.com.
I just have to say, I heard Allison on another interview, and I was I was picking myself up off the floor when she said she's writing a novel a week. I mean, and raising 2 kids and doing a whole bunch of other things. Absolutely.
That is a very impressive feat for sure.
Well, thanks.
Stephanie?
Yes, you can find me. My books are on Amazon. They're on Ingram Spark, Google Play, Chapters. They're everywhere. They're not hard. Just a Google you'll find them somewhere. I also have a website at www.landofthedragon.ca. And yeah, I'm everywhere on social media, so I'm easy to find.
Excellent. John?
DonSawyer.org is my website. I kind of try to keep up a Facebook page if you just look up Don Sawyer Books. And, my books are available in most of the usual suspect places.
Awesome. Trisha, round us out.
Right. So my two YA fantasy series or crossover series, The Realm Chronicles and The Kingdom Journals, can be found on my website, trishacopeland.com. There are also 2 free short stories if you sign up for my newsletter.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We want to thank Creative Edge for getting the team together to be here. We appreciate it. We really enjoyed having you here. We hope you guys will come back as either as a group or as individuals. You're absolutely welcome. We want to thank Mocha Memoir Press for letting us showcase their anthology Kickstarter. We hope you folks will go out and support it. I'm your host, SM Hillman. I can be found here on the Go Indie Network, hosting Zero Means You're Dead, our podcast about indie role-playing games. I occasionally host, or I occasionally GM, Hit the Dice. I always host it. But Hit the Dice, which is our actual play for role-playing games. And of course, you can find me here on This Week in Indies, especially this season. I'll be doing a lot of the hosting duties along with Joe. And occasionally, I'll be a panelist as well. Thank you, everyone out there. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching on us on Memorex, later on YouTube. And remember, hold on, I'm not very good at these transitions. And remember, it's always time to go indie now.